I stared at the hospital invoice in my hand, the paper trembling as I walked fast down the corridor toward the boardroom. My mother's treatment schedule was circled in red, dates stacked like warnings, costs climbing no matter how carefully I planned, and then I folded the bill into my bag and pushed the door open. Before I could sit, before my notebook even touched the table, Caleb Rusk's voice, the CEO, cut cleanly through the room. "We're restructuring," Caleb said, smooth and detached, realigning leadership for the next phase. Slides advanced, boxes shifted. Then my name appeared, effective immediately. He continued, "Kelly Bryant's compensation will be adjusted, 40%. The words landed before I did. "This isn't about performance," he added, already dismissing the subject. "We need flexibility." I was still standing. For 7 years. I had been the final checkpoint, the one who signed off on risk exposure, regulatory compliance, and any decision that could trigger audits, penalties, or lawsuits, when deals stalled at midnight or legal questions surfaced too late. They called me, quietly, reliably, apparently, replaceable. Before we go any further, I want to be clear, some details in the story ahead are fictionalized and supported by AI. Designed to highlight practical lessons in the workplace. If this format doesn't feel right for you, it's okay to leave. Now get some rest and take care. But if you're willing, I hope you'll stay with me through the rest of this story. Caleb finally smiled. "I'm proud to introduce my daughter, Avery Rusk," he said. "She'll be stepping in as head of strategic initiatives." Applause followed. Brief and obedient. Avery nodded, composed, seated beside her father, as if this transition required no explanation. HR leaned toward me with a practiced smile. "You're still invaluable." "Kelly," she whispered, "this doesn't change your role." "So the responsibility stays?" I asked. Caleb chuckled. "Titles and numbers are fluid," he said. "Impact is what matters." 40% wasn't fluid. It was medication. It was scans. It was time I didn't have. I thought of my mother waiting for results, trusting me to keep things stable. The meeting moved on. Budgets, timelines, celebration. My title remained on the slide, untouched. Only the number beneath it had been cut. They called it restructuring. Sitting there, finally taking my seat, I understood it for what it was, humiliation. Delivered efficiently. Before I'd even been allowed to sit down. "I hope you're doing okay today." When this story ends, take a moment to check in with someone you care about. No speeches. Just something honest. Where are you listening from right now? And if stories like this speak to you, a quiet subscription helps us keep sharing more of them. Now, let's go back to where everything first began. Numbers never cared how carefully I planned. That night, I spread the medical bills across my kitchen table and did the math again. Prescriptions insurance only partially covered, infusions billed separately, follow-up scans classified as elective until they weren't. Each line item felt colder than the last, and every subtraction circled back to the same truth: 40% wasn't a sacrifice. It was survival math. I recalculated 3 times, hoping repetition might soften reality. It didn't. Cutting my pay meant choosing between stability and care, between keeping promises to my mother and pretending optimism paid invoices. The company called it flexibility. From where I stood, it was a countdown. What made it harder was memory. I remembered conference calls taken from hospital corridors, my voice low while machines hummed behind me. I remembered signing off on risk assessments that stopped lawsuits before they reached the news, rewrote clauses before regulators noticed, and froze deals that would have cost the company millions. Each time, I told myself there would be time later. Each time, later never came. Caleb Rusk knew that history. He once said it plainly. In a meeting that ran past midnight, "Kelly is our last line of defense," he told the room, as if it were a compliment and not a confession. I believed him then. I believed loyalty still meant something. The next morning, exhaustion settled in my chest like pressure. I opened my inbox, bracing for another fire drill, another silent expectation. Instead, There was an email from HR, polite, urgent, vague. They asked me to begin transitioning certain responsibilities to Avery Rusk. No attachment, no authorization memo, no legal notice, just an assumption wrapped in courtesy. I stared at the screen, breathing slowly. Numbers didn't care, but systems did. And this one had just revealed. Avery Rusk moved into the corner office on Monday. Glass walls, new furniture, a nameplate that arrived before the ink on her title felt dry. By Tuesday, her calendar was packed with meetings she chaired confidently, speaking in verbs like accelerate and streamline. She had a dedicated assistant, priority scheduling, and the kind of access people waited years to earn. What she didn't have was weight. I noticed it the first time legal forwarded a document to me instead of her. The subject line read, "Quick check, just to be safe." It was instinctive, automatic. Like muscle memory the company couldn't break. They still expected me to catch the risks, flag the gaps, and quietly protect the organization from itself. Avery ran the meetings, but the consequences still landed on my desk. That pattern repeated: contracts, compliance reviews, edge cases that never made slides. Each time, legal copied Avery out of courtesy and me out of necessity. I felt something sour settle in my chest. This wasn't mentorship, it was displacement without transfer of responsibility. During a strategy meeting later that week, I finally asked, "Does Avery have signing authority?" The question wasn't hostile, it was practical. Authority wasn't symbolic in my world. It was documented, dated, and enforced. No one answered. Avery glanced at her screen. The CFO adjusted his pen. Legal avoided my eyes. The silence stretched long enough to feel intentional. The kind that exists when everyone knows the answer, but hopes someone else will say it. The meeting moved on as if nothing had happened. Action items were assigned. Deadlines were set. I wrote notes I wasn't sure I was still allowed to act on. The injustice wasn't loud or dramatic. It was procedural, dressed up as progress. Later that afternoon, HR asked me to stop by. She closed the door and lowered her voice. "Off the record," she said. "Avery's signing authority hasn't been finalized yet. It's in process." In process meant incomplete. Incomplete meant exposed. I nodded, thanked her, and returned to my desk. Understanding the promotion hadn't replaced me, it hollowed me out. If you're listening closely, you already know what's coming next. Don't you, support? Apparently, was now part of my job description. HR framed it politely. I was asked to support Avery during the transition. Keep things smooth. Be a team player. No stipend, no revised scope, just expectation. Delivered with a smile that suggested gratitude should replace compensation. Avery took quickly to command. In meetings, she leaned forward and repeated one sentence like a mantra. "We need to move faster. Faster past questions. Faster past review. Faster past the parts that usually saved us." Each time she said it, eyes drifted to me. Waiting for agreement I no longer offered. My calendar filled with double work. I prepared risk summaries she presented. I flagged issues she waved away. Legal still sent me late drafts. Asking for quiet confirmation before morning. Supporting the transition meant absorbing the consequences while pretending nothing had shifted. At home, speed meant something else. My mother's doctor explained the alternative protocol in careful language. Apologetic and precise. Cheaper medication, fewer sessions, more uncertainty. I nodded, signed, and drove home in silence, counting months like inventory. 40% translated cleanly there. It always did. When I raised the workload question, Caleb answered without blinking. "Everyone has sacrifices," he said. Tone even, moral complete. He spoke as if sacrifice were a shared exercise, not a private bill handed to the same person twice. So I adjusted. I stopped volunteering nights. I stopped fixing problems before they reached daylight. I read my revised contract line by line. Not searching for relief, just clarity. The change was subtle and surgical, no obligation to cover executive risk outside business hours. No expectation to step in when others stepped wrong. The irony landed slowly. They paid me less and expected more speed, more coverage, more silence. But they had also narrowed the terms. Supporting the transition no longer included protecting it at all costs. I closed the document and exhaled. The pressure was still there, dense and controlled. But now it had edges. I could feel exactly where it ended. That boundary mattered. Even as anger stayed contained, waiting, patient, and deliberately unfinished inside. Silence became my boundary the morning I stopped fixing things no one asked me to own. I still showed up, answered questions, delivered exactly what my role required. I just stopped patching gaps before they became visible. No reminders, no warnings, no late-night emails quietly rerouting risk away from leadership decisions. The change was immediate. My calendar thinned, but my inbox did not. Avery sent her first document for signature review. Confident and brief. Please process today. Her note read, no questions. No attachments explaining authority. I read it once, then archived it without comment. That afternoon. The bank responded faster than I expected. The message was short and precise. Signature not authorized. Please provide approved signatory documentation. I forwarded it to legal, copied Avery, and said nothing else. If you're listening to this and thinking you would have stepped in anyway, I understand that instinct. I'd lived there for years. But silence isn't neglect when the rules are clear. Sometimes it's the only honest response left. By evening, tension moved through the building like static. Phones rang longer. Conversations dropped when I walked past. Avery asked twice if I'd seen the bank's note. I replied with the same sentence each time. It came through, minutes before close of business. The real damage surfaced. A major transaction scheduled to clear by end of day stalled at the final checkpoint. Compliance froze it automatically. No override, no workaround. The deadline passed while everyone waited for someone else to act. I shut down my computer on time. At home. The quiet felt earned. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I hadn't interfered. I had simply respected the boundary they drew when they reduced my role to numbers. Ask yourself where responsibility truly begins when titles change faster than accountability, and whether silence in that moment feels cruel or simply fair. I knew my answer. That night, it stayed. With me there. Silence didn't break the system, it revealed it. And now a deal worth millions sat suspended. Not because I refused to help, but because authority had weight only when it was real. By the next morning, panic had replaced confidence. The stalled transaction spread through the executive floor like smoke. Thin at first, then impossible to ignore. The CFO slammed his office door hard enough to make assistants flinch. Legal pulled files from shared drives, printers humming as if speed could reverse time. I watched it unfold from my desk, detached but alert. Emails stacked quickly. Subject lines shifted from polite to urgent. Someone wrote, "We need eyes on this now." Another followed with, "Board visibility risk." Caleb Rusk stormed into the conference room and pointed straight at me. "Why didn't you stop this?" he demanded. Loud enough for everyone to hear. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation dressed as leadership. I met his stare and kept my voice level. My revised compensation no longer covers executive risk. The room froze. Legal went still. The CFO stopped pacing. No one argued. Because contracts are louder than tempers. They flipped pages instead, scanning for loopholes that weren't there. I had checked, quietly, thoroughly. Phones began ringing outside. Someone whispered, "The bank is holding," another said. "Compliance won't budge." Every path led back to authority that didn't exist. Minutes later, board counsel joined the call, her tone precise and sharp. She listened without interruption, then said one sentence that cut through the noise. "Freeze all signatures. Effective immediately." Silence followed. Heavier than shouting. No approvals, no exceptions. No one could move without exposing themselves. I leaned back, feeling the pressure peak and lock in place. This wasn't retaliation. It was procedure catching up to arrogance. The panic wasn't mine. but it surrounded me, tightening with every unanswered question, and for the first time since the cut. I knew this moment wouldn't be smoothed over. It would be examined. The air felt thin, deadlines closing in, and I sensed the board would soon demand explanations. No one had prepared for this moment alone. This is where careful listeners lean in. Are you still with me? The emergency meeting began late, the kind that pretends to be calm while pressure leaks through every pause. By then, emails had stopped pretending, and phones rang without anyone answering. We gathered around the table like people waiting for weather to change, knowing it wouldn't. Caleb opened without preamble. "We need a temporary fix," he said. "Eyes on me. Just sign so we can clear the transaction and stabilize the situation." Temporary? The word floated, weightless and dishonest. Everyone understood what it meant, if it worked. It was leadership, if it failed. It was my name. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I asked one question. Under whose legal authority would I be signing? The room went quiet. Chairs stopped moving. Pens froze mid-air. Across the table, Avery lowered her eyes to her screen, scrolling without seeing anything. She didn't look at her father. She didn't look at me. Caleb frowned. "Don't be difficult," he said. "We're all under pressure." Pressure wasn't new to me. Undefined authority was. Legal cleared her throat and asked for a moment. Files opened. Clauses were read aloud, carefully, defensively. The cut had seemed like a financial decision, on paper. It was also surgical. Legal finally spoke. With the revised compensation structure, Kelly is no longer obligated to cover executive risk outside standard operating hours. The sentence landed harder than any accusation. It wasn't opinion, it was math. Caleb leaned back, suddenly cautious. The board members on the line stopped interrupting. Authority shifted without anyone touching it. I felt it then. Not as triumph, but as gravity. I hadn't taken control. I had simply stopped carrying weight that wasn't contractually mine. The meeting stretched on, voices tight, options shrinking, somewhere between midnight and resignation. It became clear the system hadn't lost protection. It had lost the illusion that it could borrow mine. That realization settled quietly, irreversible, and everyone sensed the balance had shifted for good, now permanently. Pressure changed the room once the board took control. Questions replaced commands, and every answer demanded a name. They started with Avery's promotion, then moved backward, step by step, until the decision to cut my salary sat exposed in the middle of the table. Board members asked who initiated the change, who approved it, who documented it. HR spoke first, careful and vague. Pointing to leadership direction, Caleb interrupted, irritated. Insisting HR handled compensation logistics, HR pushed back, citing executive instruction. The exchange felt less like clarification and more like erosion. For the first time since this began, Avery wasn't shielded. She sat still, hands folded, eyes darting between speakers. No one softened questions for her. No one reframed mistakes as learning opportunities. The board addressed her directly, asking what authority she believed she held when she accepted the role. She hesitated, then admitted she assumed the paperwork existed. That assumption landed heavily. As they continued, the pattern emerged. Nepotism hadn't just elevated Avery, it had bypassed process, skipped documentation, and ignored safeguards built for moments exactly like this. Each shortcut now had a cost. Each favor demanded accountability. Caleb grew defensive. "We needed speed," he said. "We trusted our people." The board chair responded calmly. "Trust doesn't replace governance." I listened without speaking. The anger I'd carried tightened into something colder, more focused. This wasn't about revenge. It was about exposure. The system wasn't failing because I stepped back. It was failing because it had been bent around one family. The meeting paused while council reviewed notes. When they returned, the board's decision was immediate. An independent audit would review all personnel decisions from the last 18 months. Promotions, compensation changes, Authority assignments. The room went quiet again. This time, it wasn't panic. It was realization. Nepotism hadn't just cost them trust. It had triggered scrutiny they couldn't control. No one spoke after that, because everyone understood how deep the damage ran, and who had allowed it happen today. The offer came quietly, almost respectfully. As if volume might make it offensive, Caleb asked for a few minutes alone, away from the board line, away from witnesses. He spoke like a man negotiating weather. My salary would be restored, a retention bonus added, my mother's insurance coverage reconsidered. Immediately, for a moment, temptation pressed in, sharp and practical. This was relief measured in treatments, not pride. I thought about the nights counting pills, the mornings pretending calm. I also thought about how easily injustice tried to disguise itself as generosity. I looked at Caleb and felt nothing soften. You don't get to fix injustice with favors. The words surprised him, not because they were harsh, but because they were final. I told him my only request was simple. The record needed to reflect exactly what happened, without edits or favors, no backdating, no reinterpretation, no selective memory. The board listened carefully this time, after a brief pause. The chair spoke. Caleb would be removed from decision-making pending review. It wasn't dramatic. It was procedural, and that made it permanent. I left the room knowing temptation had been answered. Integrity, once chosen, stopped being heavy. It simply became necessary. The meeting moved on. But the power in the room had shifted. People spoke slower, choosing words with care. I stayed quiet, aware that steadiness carried more authority than anger. The offer was gone, and so was his leverage. What remained was the truth, finally written where it belonged, for the first time since the cut. The numbers stopped arguing. They had answered to something stronger than favors, and I knew the line would hold. Whatever came next would be decided in daylight, not corridors. I breathed out slowly, letting the tension release at last. The offer had failed because it was never the solution. Truth, documented, carried consequences they could not undo. I was ready for those consequences, and they finally understood that. Power had quietly changed hands there. What it ultimately cost them became clear by morning. Caleb Rusk was placed on indefinite leave, announced in a tone so neutral it sounded rehearsed. Avery Rusk lost her title quietly, without ceremony, without applause, like it had always been temporary. No one argued. No one defended the decision. I was offered a new contract before sunrise. Independent, transparent, defined authority, defined limits, defined compensation, no vague loyalty clauses, no silent expectations. I read every line, signed once, and felt something settle that had been restless for weeks. The meeting finally adjourned as daylight pressed against the windows. Exhaustion hung in the room, but so did clarity. Nothing had collapsed dramatically. No voices were raised. The system corrected itself because it had to. They thought cutting my pay would buy my silence. It only taught me exactly what my signature was worth. I walked out while the city woke up. The crisis behind me, the future narrower and safer at the same time. The emergency meeting had lasted all night for one simple reason. They assumed authority could be inherited. It couldn't. And by the time they understood that, the sun was already up. Nothing else needed explanation anymore there. Systems don't collapse because someone shouts. They collapse when accountability is removed, when responsibility is handed to the wrong people, and when silence is mistaken for weakness. I learned that dignity isn't loud. It's choosing not to carry weight that was never yours to begin with. There were moments when fear felt practical, when money, health, and uncertainty all pressed in at once. But even then, I realized something: steady integrity costs less in the long run than compromise. The truth doesn't need defending if it's written down, followed, and respected. And sometimes, the most human thing you can do is refuse to fix what others insist on breaking. If you've ever been placed in a position where fairness was traded for convenience, I'd really like to hear how you handled it. Did you speak up? step back, or quietly draw a line. Where are you listening from right now if this story resonated with you? Feel free to leave a comment, give the video a like, or share it with someone who might need it. And if you'd like to stay with us for more stories like this, a simple subscription helps keep them coming.